integrating solid applications and data, that's a challenge for any given project, but it's one of the most quoted challenges when you're trying to deliver a project. If your data is not connected, you're not getting value out of it. And pretty much anything that an organization wants to do today, any project you want to deliver relies on data. And not having that data connected is a challenge.
And this composable building block is actually leveraging data in it to help business improve their process and give them as a tool to make decisions from actionable insights. It needs to be clear in what it is that it addresses from a business purpose. It needs to be simple, easy to understand. The more nodes, so the more business capabilities you add to this network, the more compound effect and you have.
Okay, everyone, I think we should begin. I think due to the heat, I want to thank you all for showing up today. What a great venue. What a great city. I've not been in the Scotsman for many, many years, and when I was last here, it was actually a Cayley. And we kept very well hydrated, so I'm going to encourage you to drink the water. We weren't on water that night. So welcome to the first event we've actually hosted in Scotland, and thank you to Infomentum for sponsoring today. They're an implementation and delivery partner. Today's going to be very informal. I hope there's going to be lots of questions from the room, and we can take questions. Just stick your hand up in an old school way. But today we're going to be taking you through a data strategy for government with a Mule platform at the heart of it. I'm going to be quick because we're running slightly late. Our first break will be about 3:05, and we'll break for about 20 minutes so you can get a drink, cup of coffee, cake. But I'm going to hand over actually to the talented people, the clever people in the room. So we've got Corrado, our client architect, and Bruno, our solutions engineer, who are going to take you through the point of view. So thank you, gentlemen.
Great, so we're going to be talking our point of view on data from a MuleSoft perspective. Corrado is really the brains behind the operation. I'm just sharing a bit of the presenting. I'm a solution engineer, so my job is to work with our customers, understanding problems, challenges, ambitions, and how we can, through our approach, our operating model, and our technology, help solve those problems and meet those ambitions. In terms of the agenda, we're going to be talking about data as a whole, lots of interesting stuff. Now, we will have a Q&A session in the end. If you have any pressing questions throughout, just raise your hand and I'll be happy to answer. And yeah, that's it. We'll get straight into it. So if we think about data challenges that the government have today, the first interesting statistic here is that 74% of public organizations actually are ahead of their anticipated digital transformation progress. I personally thought this was interesting. Usually it's always like, I wanted to be here, but I'm actually a bit behind. Maybe they were just not forecasting very ambitiously. Now, despite that, there is a range of challenges that public organizations share. If we look at this number here, so 93% of IT decision makers find that there are significant silos in data. So this is often a result of how they've procured applications, just natural sprawling of different technologies, how business organically grows. Often, you just have new business demand and you end up with more data silos as a result. And this is a challenge because if your data is not connected, you're not really getting value out of it. Now, 99%, that's the highest percentage number on screen. The IT decision makers find that integration challenges hinder technology transformation and the delivery of their projects. That is the number one concern overall. So what that tells us is we need to connect our data in order to actually be able to deliver on digital transformation and ultimately, most importantly, on business outcomes for citizens. And that's under the context that there's increased pressure on governments in terms of funding, in terms of new demand coming in, citizens demanding newer and modern experiences. And there's many roadblocks, right? Integrating solid applications and data, that's a challenge for any given project, but it's one of the most quoted challenges when you're trying to deliver a project. Lack of IT skills, risk management, hiring and retaining. So it's really not just a technology problem, it's an overall concern of people, process and technology, and that's a topic we're going to talk about today. And data silos are fundamentally one of the most important challenges that organizations face. If your data is not connected, you're not getting value out of it. And pretty much anything that an organization wants to do today, any project you want to deliver relies on data. And not having that data connected is a challenge. And knowing that we want to connect data, why is it that organizations, fail to integrate that data the way they want to? First of all, user-facing applications. If you want to surface data to a mobile application, to a user interface, any kind of experience you want to build for citizens or for employees internally, it's often difficult because your data is not integrated in a way that is ready to enable that experience. If we think about moving data to a data warehouse or creating different and more elaborate user-facing experiences, again, it all boils down to the integration strategy and how you've built your data connectivity within your organization. And at the end of the day, it comes down to what we've got here at the bottom. Unlocking your data and connecting your data comes down to a future-proof strategy. And it's often the lack of that inherent cohesive strategy for integration that leads to a lot of the challenges and ultimately struggling to move fast enough, innovate, and achieve business outcomes for citizens. Now, a very common approach in public sector that we see is putting data into a data lake. It's almost like a default option nowadays that I've got a ton of data across different systems. How do I make sense of all of that? Well, let me push it all into the same place. But actually, that's quite challenging. It's usually a huge project to try and do that because you need to figure out how do I access data from system A, B, C, all the way up to 50, 100, 1,000, depending on the size of the organization. So that's a challenge in itself, and it's a problem you need to solve. Once you've solved that, you're now transforming that data. That's additional logic that needs to be developed and maintained. How do you transform that data in a way that can be connected, correlated, so you can get insight out of it, apply analytics to that data? Lastly, you get to reporting. Okay, so now you've derived insight from the data after a lot of effort, but is it actionable? Is it connected? Is it truly connected? Is it reusable? Is the effort, the money, the time you've spent on it, is it something that you can use for the future to deliver more projects?
So I think there's a lot of insights that are highlighted with the connectivity benchmark report, and Bruno has spoken about it, and which effectively highlights the complexity and the challenges that we have with digital transformation. I will briefly introduce myself. Before covering this role, I've been working for a decade with large organizations that have a scale, in terms of scale, have a global reach to implement really complex solutions. And so I've seen firsthand the challenges of data and integration and how a sound data strategy really makes a difference in delivering on time at speed. So looking at the problem, we'll just now switch gear and try to figure out what it is that we can do to mitigate, to fix, and to overcome the challenges that organizations face. So effectively, the first section is providing a solution to solve those data challenges. And we start with the definition of what it is a digital data product. So as the definition says, is the way we see it, a composable building block, which can be an application or an API. So basically something that is wrapping a business capability into a system within a process. And this composable building block is actually leveraging data in it to help business improve their process and give them as a tool to make decisions from actionable insights This is a very overload statement, very rich in different aspects, and we'll unwrap it in the next few sections. So what are the key characteristics, the non-function requirement that we need to fulfill so that we can adopt and define and implement a successful composable building blocks? It needs to be clear in what it is that it addresses from a business purpose. It needs to be simple, easy to understand, built so it can be changed if there is requirements, and it needs to be fulfilling all those non-functional requirements in terms of scalability, performance, resilience, being able to monitor observability, and all those good things, and implemented in a way that are within the boundaries of a full life cycle management. And if I were to give a 30-second summary of what today's presentation is that is what effectively MuleSoft does. It enables data into an organization to become accessible via reusable building blocks. So effectively, those can be APIs, events, messages, just an interface to wrap, as I said, the business capabilities and make them modular in a way that they are usable and consumable by the people that have a legitimate right to do so at the specific point on need, no matter where it is held, so in which systems, if it's a combination of them or not. And I always like to talk at this point about the data value and the data liquidity. The data liquidity, this definition goes like this: having the most data does not equal having the most data value. And I think there was Bruno's example with the data lake is kind of a fitting one. The data value is maximized if I'm able to provide access to it at the right of the right data in the right context at the right time, and that is a key measurement of the data value, which is the data liquidity. So let's break down those three aspects to understand a little bit more what we mean. With right data, we mean we don't want to pollute the ecosystem with low quality data. We want to focus on the most valuable one. We want to make sure that it is authorized, authoritative, and comprehensive as much as possible, so that, for example, we can address gaps when acquiring data or when digitizing it. We want to make sure that we always give and have the right context, which is avoiding implementing solutions that result in siloed data. We want to avoid that. We want to make sure that relevant, reliable, and composable data is available at the point of use, at the point of need, and enriching the core business data, the core data, as much as possible with, for example, metadata that is collected as a business process evolves. And the right time we mean we want data in real time or near real time. As Bruno was saying earlier, there is no point in getting to a report that has stale data. What do you do with it? You can't use it for actionable insights. We want to make sure that there is proper governance, a management in place, because we want to fulfill security and safety of data, particularly for public sector organizations. That is critical. And we want to be in a position where we can proactively and predictably distribute the data to the right stakeholders at the anticipated point of use. So data liquidity is a really important aspect and goes really well with the data value economies of scale.
Are you taking questions?
Yes, please. Yeah.
So I guess, is this going to become much more important as we move towards a world where AI will become part of our normal business practices?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's actually in the next slide I'm going to mention about this, because one will think the more data sets I add, the more correlation I can achieve. And with AI and machine learning, I can automate, I can exponentially do that. And so, thank you to AI and machine learning, I can actually extract value much faster and much better than otherwise. And so I get at the first point to a situation where I have an economy of scales. I'm looking to add more and more data sets as much as possible, feeding them to a machine learning algorithm, to some AI capabilities to extract actionable insights. However, data liquidity is also critically important, because then I can get to a point where I may be adding more and more data sets, and governance and maintenance and security becomes a risk at the point where I could be creating a technical debt. So governance and data sets correlation is really important, but I need to make sure that data liquidity, so data set fed, for example, to AI tools, are kept to a very high standard, very high quality, and not to a point where, for example, adding more data sets become counterproductive for the overall governance of the solution. Yeah, so AI plays a very, really important role. It's an accelerator to, in my view, actionable insights. So it can really keep liquidity of the data high. Yeah. And so we looked very quickly at the what of the proposed solution to the data strategy, to the challenges that organizations face in the digital transformation. It's all easy said than done, right? How can we create these digital data products in a way that I keep liquidity really high, even though I increase complexity in the overall solution? I'd like to do a step back before jumping on the answer, and actually look at a Gartner survey. This was published in last year, 2022, and they have surveyed thousands of organizations in all the sectors, not just government, but also commercial. Interviewed them in the three key principles of the business composability, which are those that you see on the left, and benchmarked the government worldwide, it's not just UK, against the most composable organizations which are in the commercial space, measured on the dimension of composable thinking, which is established guidelines to involve everyone, not just IT, but also business, in taking strategic planning decisions as a way to adapt to rapid change. If there are external factors that require organizations to immediately shift to a different direction, involving everyone, all the stakeholders, all the parties in organizations will make that easier. The second aspect is the composable business architecture, which is the delivery process. And business and technology capability models to identify commonalities and establish a roadmap to decompose processes into business capabilities, understanding that those business capabilities are common across multiple processes, and effectively prioritizing them in the roadmap so to have a compounding effect when delivering a solution. And the last one is adopting a composable technologies. So it's practices, methodologies, and technologies to implement a modular solution, an iterative solution, supporting, for example, self-serve of the team involved in the delivery of these business capabilities, and also hybrid deployment, so cloud and self-managed. And what we see is not really a nice result for the government, for the public sector. However, I'm not personally surprised if we think of the unique set of challenges that the public sector has. Naturally, they need to be more conservative in adopting new technologies because there is an intrinsic risk of the data. Most organizations in the public sector don't own their data, they own it on behalf of the public. So that is a much more complex responsibility. They are surrounded, they are in organizations that are a lot more complex, with a lot more stakeholders, internal and external. And they're also impacted by external factors like government changing policies all of a sudden. You need to react to that. So I'm not surprised with the grey results. And the way I see it is that there is a very big potential to achieve solutions and a point that is effective and efficient in the data strategy. I will just stop for a second. Just welcome any comment or questions on this slide. If you strongly disagree or agree. Yes, please.
Fundamental question. What do you mean by composable thinking, composableness?
Yeah, so very briefly, there's many processes and product and services that organizations provide to their consumer as a provider. And what Gartner is saying in terms of composability is that if you were able to break down those business processes into business capabilities and understand those business capabilities, are they leveraged and used somewhere else? So maybe I want to prioritize those in my delivery roadmap because as I move on to the next project, I will be able to reuse those business capabilities. And those can be anything. It's obviously domain and business specific. But what Gartner is saying, and also what we champion and we say, is that if you are able to deliver these business capabilities in a way that are modular, that are kind of agnostic from where they are leveraged to build the business process, then you can reuse that functionality, that capability in other projects and have this compound effect. There's a lot of benefits. There's also the effect of getting to a place where your enterprise solution is modular and so is predictable to change. If there is a shift of priority, so you need to remove something because maybe a system has been decommissioned or is reaching the end of life, you have this interface, this API messages or events that are wrapping that functionality and effectively becoming an abstraction layer to the business capabilities. Okay. And so all of this definition of composable enterprise, composable business, it's calling for a shift of mindset from traditional one where there's data built in silos to data is managed as an enterprise asset. The biggest companies, non-commercial or otherwise, in the world, their biggest asset is effectively the data. Thinking of large systems, large solutions into thinking composable, modular, from let's not fix what is not broken because we don't want to have any risk, to actually thinking that everything should be changeable, that change is inevitable, to a point where I want to be able to make changes in a deterministic way, lowering risk and being able to flex to different and shifting priorities as they arise. From silo thinking, so not just siloed data, but also silo thinking, where there's this duality between the IT in the delivery seat and the business asking and complaining, being frustrated by the speed of delivery. So from silo thinking and innovation to thinking together common and reusable building blocks, which are the composable objects we mentioned earlier. And as a reflection, as an abstraction layer to create these composable and reusable building blocks, you really want to shift from APIs as an afterthought, after the functionality has been built, to actually API-centric and API-first when approaching to definition of a business capability. Who is the consumer, what it is that they are looking for, and how should I implement the API as I define the business capability. And last but not least, from too much server management, so IT being in charge of the infrastructure management, to cloud managed and serverless. That frees up time and space for the IT to focus on more important things like innovation. And that is effectively the composable building blocks all about, is creating a network of nodes, of functionalities, capabilities that wrap system of records that hold data in a way that IT becomes a partner of the business, not just the only party that is in the delivery of it. And the more nodes, so the more business capabilities you add to this network, the more compound effect and you have. Obviously, every node is secured by design because that capability is not directly accessed to the core system or to the system of record of where data is. It's secured by the API. But the more nodes you add, the more you realize you can deliver at speed and agile, so ready for a change with these composable building blocks that can be plugged, reused in different initiatives, business initiatives. As I said, they will all be secured across endpoints, so this is kind of a reference to a zero trust architecture that you can implement, where you're not securing these capabilities, these services that ultimately you provide at the perimeter of your organization. You do it throughout the life cycle of the data as it flows in a process. And all of this results in dramatically lowering costs because of reuse and because of quality of delivery increasing as you scale. And that is, in another way, the same concept, which is the composable business as the data flows. This is representing what we call API-led architecture. It's not just MuleSoft. It's a generic framework that is effectively representing business capabilities and business process broken down into 3 layers of abstractions that provide modularity. So looking at the bottom, you would have these system APIs, system capabilities that effectively sit in front of your system of records, your systems, whichever they are, wherever they are, and effectively strip, extract data, make it the data in it available to use, stripping it out of the context of the data is like the syntax of the system where it's held, because there is bias in the way data is represented in the system, which might not be the same as the organization sees it. Providing effectively a layer that serves data in those systems to the process API, the middle one, where the business capabilities are effectively implemented. You might have data, patient data that is held in a lot of systems in different dimensions. You want to have a single view of it. That is what you could achieve at the process layer. And last but not least is the experience layer, which is effectively leveraging the definition of the content of a process API and tailoring it to the channel of the consumption. For example, you might have data about citizens and completely 360 at the process level, but you want to serve that to the public, and you also want to serve that to some stakeholders, some people inside the organizations. You want for the former to anonymize, aggregate as much as possible, but for the latter you might go to a different level of granularity. You can do that with the Experience API. And so as you implement a data strategy with this particular process, you realize that you are able to unlock and orchestrate the business capability to deliver agility, embrace and manage complexity at scale. All of a sudden, complexity is not as much scary anymore. It's not as risky creating technical debt. Building secure and governed connected intelligent enterprise. You empower knowledge workers. It's not just the IT all of a sudden in the driving seat, it's a collective effort in the organization. And ultimately enable a governed flow of consumable data across all your business and all your personas. And as Gartner says, we echo what they say. You can't succeed with just technology. Technology is just a means to an end. Your technology is actually supporting people and process pillars. You need to have a proven approach that provides composable building blocks, and that is the API-led connectivity we looked at a couple of slides back. You need to be able to shift from IT in the driving seat, in the delivery capacity, into becoming an enabler of the business as well, providing a platform for communication and exchange with the self-service reuse, so that also business can co-work and co-create with the IT. And the platform is just a tool that should make the first two pillars life easy. So people and process actually focus on the innovation rather than fiddling with a lot of tools, a lot of stacks and technologies in order to achieve that. So we looked at the what of the solution, the how, which is the composable building blocks. Obviously, we want a strategy to be as effective and as efficient as possible. You can't really do that without a data framework and governance. And the best analogy we can come up to is with the urban planning. When you are deciding and building a new city or a new town, you want to make sure that you plan in advance all the common services, all the amenities, the public transport, the utilities, how they are going to be reaching all those houses, schools, parks, and so on. And if you don't do that, you end up in like the image on the left, where everything is inefficient, everything is siloed, and everyone is out for themselves, making even the simplest and smallest change all of a sudden becomes a risk, becomes slow, becomes inefficient, frustrating for the stakeholders experiencing it, and not secure. What you really want to shift, and this is the governance, the framework that should be providing, is thinking of all the common services as the integration, the data, and the access control to the application stack. The city planning all of a sudden becomes a multi-year roadmap of a future state. And the policies, the standards, the rules, the process in the urban planning are effectively the governance of it. All of this results in a much better looking city, in my opinion, and lower total cost of ownership and risk. And that is effectively a framework and also in the data strategy. This is a very crowded slide. However, from top to bottom is artifacts that belong to an architecture framework that go from the more abstract architecture principles to the more concrete, practical engineering up to the delivery on the fields. You want to make sure you define, in particular for the data strategy, an API integration, security, cloud, and additional ones strategies in place, because you want to keep a line of sight. You want to make sure that everyone in the organization is on the same page, so to implement some sort of choreography of all the parties. So moving on to data architecture and looking at at the logical architecture, as you can see on screen. This is really a way to understanding how I can bring the ecosystem in, and realizing that yes, there are stakeholders inside that are there for defining the services, the products that you want, that you offer, the consumers. But then you realize that there's providers, there are consumers, there are third parties that wrap your services to provide another services to their own consumers, and all of this being potentially either internal or external to the organization. So it's quite a complex. There's a lot of stakeholders involved around the services that you have. And so the need of a marketplace where you have all these assets readily available for for reuse, for discovery, profiled and secured, and for everyone to discover and to use. You want to also have a management / control plane that provides complete control of all these assets, giving you observability, monitoring of all these digital data products, regardless of where they are, how they are defined, and what technology they are implemented. And last but not least, a runtime plane where you can enforce runtime, for example, global policies for security, and effectively implement a high-level logical architecture that provides a virtuous loop of data value, data liquidity, and so on. So starting from the number one, a platform that is able to ingest and acquire data from whichever system, wherever they are in real time, providing them that data for operational decisions at whichever channel of consumptions that are at the bottom, and also potentially to a data lake or an analytics to provide actionable real-time business insights that can be consumed by the channels up there, and closing the loops with the channels providing data decisions. So the number 3 that is in real time held into the system of records, regardless of what they are and where they are. And you want, in this logical architecture, a solution, a single unified solution that, regardless of the technology of all the systems, it can provide a centralized place for governance, compliance, automated security, a data marketplace for all the stakeholders involved, promoting and championing a model where IT becomes an enabler of the business as much as possible. And so we move on to the need of a digital marketplace as part of the data strategy. In other words, how can I engage with the ecosystem to drive adoption of the services, to provide a service that is more close to the expected experience of the consumer? How can I discover new segments, new services that I did not think of? And I like to talk about, it's a juxtaposition between the industrial supply chain opposed to the digital supply chain. In the industrial supply chain, there are a lot of expensive and complex and inefficient stages, from the sourcing of the raw material, wherever they are, whatever material we're talking about, to the distribution of it into the manufacturing area, so the physical products and goods can be built, to the network and complex and inefficient network of distribution up to the point of sales. The supply chain completes with the consumers purchasing these products and consuming them. If we compare to the digital supply chain, and the sourcing is effectively the discovery of data in the data strategy and services that belong to that data, which we provide as an organization. The manufacturing is the development of the digital solutions. The distribution is the deployment of the digital solutions into live environments, into products, so that they can be used. And the sales is the customer subscribing to that specific service. Last but not least, the consumption is the experience of the customer using those services. And so you might realize that development, deployment, and registration compared to the industrial supply chain is a lot more optimized. Okay, it's a lot more efficient and effective than the physical supply chain. And so organizations, particularly in the commercial space, have realized that they need to focus on the discovery and the experience in order to elevate the services they provide. They need to understand, how can I discover and improve my services and the data I need to deliver that service, and how can I improve the user experience so the customer will stick to those services, will use more, and will be happy customer. We realize that we need to lean on all the parties involved in the ecosystem. It's all of a sudden not just somebody defining what it is that we are providing as services and somebody delivering them. It's engaging with the public. So in this case, the consumer of the services, the partners that might be wrapping your services to provide their own services with their own customers, suppliers or internal staff. And what you want is an API digital marketplace where all the assets, all those composable business capabilities are indexed, are represented, wherever, whatever functionality, whatever system they wrap, however they are developed in terms of API, whichever technologies, in a single place that can serve, profiled with the right authentication and authorization level to the different consumer of those assets. There's a list of examples in there, but in short, you want to publish all those reusable integration assets. You want for them to be fully governed and secured by design, and you want to be able to engage with all those parties to drive improvements on those assets.
Thank you, Corrado. So yeah, we've talked a lot about data and honestly about how MuleSoft can help our customers manage data, get value out of data, connect to data. And I just wanted to bring a bit of credibility to that and talk about how we've done this for thousands of customers worldwide, hundreds of customers in the UK, and in public sector specifically. I mean, we've got a few on screen at the moment. Welsh Water, we've done back-end system integration for them, turned them away from manual processes and inefficient processes and help them deliver better experiences for citizens at speed. Health Security Agency, if you still remember that thing called COVID a few years ago and how the first version of Test and Trace was a bit of a fiasco, well, we came in and solved that problem. In about 8 weeks, we helped deliver Test and Trace that worked, where people could get their testing results within about 15 minutes, scaling to up to 16 million test results per day. Coventry University, who picked us to be their central integration platform, precisely for some of the things that Corrado mentioned, discoverability, reusability, having that central platform that allows you to do full API lifecycle management has been incredibly valuable for them. Rail Delivery Group, who started off with use case around rail cards as a trial, but have now moved on to reservations. So when you think about central timetabling, and you can go to multiple rail providers across the UK and you get a central timetable in real time, well, there's MuleSoft behind the scenes providing that integration, providing that example. Land Registry, which I'm going to talk a little bit more in the next slide actually, where they did a financial transformation. And in the police, and this is just a few of many examples because we really work across transportation, central government, and as small as local councils. And talking of land registry, so there was a financial transformation project, really financial consolidation around Anaplan, and it was one of our most renowned partners who are in the room today, Infomentum, to deliver this. And it was a very, very successful project. So if we look at some of these numbers, they achieved 62.86% asset reuse. And there was a question earlier about composability. Well, composability is fundamentally founded on reuse. If you implement the right integration strategy, where you're not thinking of a project in isolation, but rather, how can I apply the right principle so that my assets can be reused for the next project? You don't necessarily need to know what that project is going to be. If you have sight of that, fantastic. But as you deliver more projects, you're going to deliver faster and faster because you've got that reuse. And 62% is a fantastic number, by the way. And lastly, that really amounts to a lot of saved hours in terms of development. And not just development, but also maintenance of the solutions, because you're building fewer applications, there's less to maintain. And that altogether is what brings us to a fantastic business case. You can achieve incredible return on investment by taking the right approach with the right operating model and the right technology. And that's really the MuleSoft value proposition in a nutshell. And again, just to add another layer of credibility to this, we've been leaders in the market for a good number of years now. You've got three primary spaces that are considered by Gartner, traditionally two spaces: iPaaS, or integration platform as a service, and full API, full lifecycle API management. And we've been leaders in this space for many years now, and we're the de facto market leader in the space most years. More recently, we've been talking about how we can help customers even further, and we introduced the concept of hyper-automation. So not just your fundamental integration and all the concepts around data and connectivity that we've been talking about today, but actually automating your business end-to-end by empowering business stakeholders. And we want to help you do that strategically, so we introduced RPA with API connectivity access, so it can be seamlessly integrated into the rest of the integration network. And yeah, we're leaders in this space, and we just work with hundreds of different customers every day to help them succeed with the help of our partners. And that's really all we had for you today, but very happy to discuss any topics in particular. Hopefully there were some more thoughts that people wanted to ask about.